Welcome, and thank you for tuning into this afternoon's panel as part of the Word on the Street Toronto 2021 Festival. This is our 32nd annual and second fully virtual. I'm Vanessa, your host. I'm a white person with glasses and brown hair. I'm wearing a white shirt, and behind me is just a white wall. We are excited to be presenting this special conversation today on Zoe Whittall's newest novel, The Spectacular, with Kevin Hardcastle. Our accessibility sponsor for this event is HarperCollins Canada. Before we dive into our discussion, we need to recognize the land that we occupy. The Toronto of today exists because of the Toronto Purchase, also known as Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation in 1805. And this is with a final claim settlement in 2010. Watts Toronto also recognizes the history of the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Seneca nations of this territory. The place in which Watts operates is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. Toronto, or Toronto, is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, with long histories on this land. And acknowledging this is only the first step in building a practice of land stewardship and Indigenous solidarity that honors these peoples. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land you occupy wherever you're tuning in from. Just a few announcements before we introduce today's panelists. This is our final day of our 10-day festival where we've been celebrating storytelling, ideas, and imagination. Earlier today, we streamed panels about poetry and the body, how to be a better human, and a celebration of Indigenous literature with First Nation communities read. For information on our upcoming panels, visit our website at toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca. If you want to be the first to know about new videos from Word on the Street, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find all of the panels from this year's festival. And also, if you enjoyed today's talk, please give this video a like to help others find it as well. Now, I'm pleased to welcome our moderator, Kevin Hardcastle. Kevin is a fiction writer from Simcoe County, Ontario. He studied writing at the University of Toronto and Cardiff University. He was a finalist for the 2012 Journey Prize, and his stories have been published widely in Canada and anthologized internationally. Kevin Hardcastle's debut short story collection, Debris, won the Trillium Book Award and the Relit Award for short fiction. His debut novel, In the Cage, was published in fall 2017 by Biblioasis. In the Cage was later published in translation by Polar Verlag in Germany and Editions Albin Michel in France, where it was a finalist for the Prix Page America. And our guest this evening is Zoe Whittall. Zoe is the author of The Spectacular and 3 previous novels, the Giller shortlisted The Best Kind of People, Lambda winning Holding Still for As Long as Possible, and debut Bottle Rocket Heart. She has published 3 collections of poetry and also is a Canadian Screen Award, and is also a Canadian Screen Award winning TV and film writer with credits on the Baroness Vaughn Sketch Show, Schitt's Creek, Degrassi, and others. She lives in Toronto. Thank you both for joining us this afternoon, and I'm going to leave you to your discussion.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Hi, Zoe.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm okay. It's been a couple years, I think. Probably around this time 2 years ago, I saw you down at Harbor somewhere, probably.
Probably, yes.
So anyway, you have a new book.
I have a new book.
Spectacular. I really enjoyed reading it. I was honored to be chosen to moderate this event. So I think they were going to ask you to do a reading from the book first. So if you'd like to go ahead and do that, and then we can jump into questions about it and see where it takes us. But I'm sure viewers would like to hear you read some of your fine novel for a little while. So
sure.
Great.
Okay. So I'm going to read a short section from the middle of the book. And one of the main characters, Missy, it's at the tail end of a Cross America tour. They have gone into Vancouver to play a show. She's a cellist in an indie rock band, and the year is 1997. And just a little warning before I read, I do use an anti-gay slur, but it's contextual and makes sense for the scene, but just in case you're sensitive to that. So I'm going to start reading in a scene where Missy, the main character, is incredibly hungover, and she's sitting in the van waiting to cross the border back into Washington with her band. I drink a bottle of peach Snapple, close my eyes, put on my headphones. I don't wake up when everyone else does the pre-border cleanup. I don't even know where my passport is when Tom takes me away and says, "Get out your ID, we're at the border." We have a few cars to go, are moving quite slowly, and it takes me a while to find it, stuffed in my army bag with crumples of receipts and wrappers. When I hand it up to Billy, who is driving, he gives it to the bored-looking customs agent. When he opens it, a forgotten flap of cocaine falls out of it. In my defense, there isn't actually any cocaine left in it, but it isn't the world's smallest bag of flour. The customs agent sighs. Tom mutters, "Fuck you, Missy." The border guard hands me a cup of coffee in a paper cup, the kind they have in police stations in the movies. I take a sip. Calling it coffee is generous, more a half-hearted scoop from a lukewarm puddle. He smells like the drugstore cologne a lover of mine in New Mexico used to swipe from CVS. Cheap, the kind you wouldn't want to light a match around. I imagine his apartment, navy blue sheets on his bed, never washed enough, sweat socks bought in bulk with red, black, or blue stripes, first-person shooter video games, canned pasta, Dave Matthews or Hootie and the Blowfish CDs, a girlfriend he once punched in high school that he still talks about as his one true love when he gets wasted with his buddies. It feels wrong when he speaks with authority, knowing all I know from just looking at him. We can't let you back into the United States, Melissa. That's the bottom line. He drums his fingers on the fake wood desk. I know he isn't the guy at the top or even the middle. He has a ruddy glow with too many pimples to be deciding my fate. I blink and his zits get bigger. I have official invitations from music festivals and a live TV taping to attend. I start rummaging in my backpack and pulling out papers, an itinerary listing our venues, the official invitation to appear on the late night show, the financial details that management had typed up just in case we were asked at the border. I can't believe Gord went ahead on a plane and isn't here to be the business guy, the smooth things over guy. Gord makes people do things they don't want to do. But what would he say? "I'm not your babysitter," Gord often sighed, pulling me toward my room some nights. I can't convince the agent that the baggie contained traces of aspirin or crushed up vitamin C tablet. It is stamped with a juvenile skull and bones design on the outside. Plus, the agent found a second baggie in a pile of bow resin and loose change and hair elastics in my cello case. Now agent number 2 has joined us. Seems like we've hit the next level. "Your band will have to continue their tour without you," he says, affecting the tone of a child playing the role of vice principal. He slides some paperwork across the desk and gives me a dismissive look. "You didn't actually find any drugs on me. You can't arrest me for memories of cocaine." "I can do a lot of things," he says, purposely fondling the gun on his hip. I can't hold back my scoff. "Do you want to make your life even harder, Ms. Wood? I can put you in jail. I have that authority." "I don't want to be Melissa Wood. I am Missy Alamo. I've been Missy Alamo for months. Melissa Wood used to skip social studies class in grade 7 and once walked into the police station near her high school and sat across from a lady with a patient smile who said there was no way to find my mom if she didn't want to be found. That happened more than once." "Answer me," says the second agent. "No, I don't wish things to be harder," I say in a clipped, chirpy tone. The reality of what this border guard is saying starts to seep in. This isn't something I'll be able to talk my way out of and tell as a funny story to the guys later today. "We were on SNL last month. Did you see us?" He looks vaguely impressed but suppresses it. "Oh, I've heard of you guys. Your singer is the faggot with the long hair." "Well, Billy gets more pussy than God if you want to get technical, but you're probably picturing our band. Yeah." He starts humming the chorus to our most famous song. I nod because I think he wants confirmation that it's the right song, but he doesn't. He hums an entire verse and chorus. It is very uncomfortable to watch and listen to him do this. He holds eye contact the entire time, and it makes me wonder if he's a sociopath. After the final note, he stands up, and they both leave me in the tiny office room. I'm never going to be able to play that song again. So that's a little excerpt from Missy in the middle of the book.
So that's an interesting scene to choose. I was going to start in a different place, but I think I'll start keying off of that scene with one of the main things that I thought was interesting in the novel. There's a lot going on there that comes to bear on the rest of the story. The interaction with an authority figure, a man especially, who is dictating what's going to happen to Missy and her life from there on, and then this kind of gray area, or this kind of unrealistic state that Missy lives in on the tour, which is also present through the novel, where I think what I'm trying to get at is there's a lot in the novel about what things really are as opposed to what they're perceived to be. And so I wondered if you'd talk about that a little bit, because I think a lot of the novel is essentially, whether it's through motherhood, whether it's through how men are dictating these women's lives, anything like that, and how secret shames of the family actually come out through the course of this epic kind of, expansive, comprehensive journey of this family. There is a real thread through the entire novel of these things that appear to be a certain way, but actually are something much, much different. And the pressures of society on these women to, have them suppress this information or carry this information alone, while decisions are being made by external forces. So I wonder if you'd speak, it's a broad topic, but if you'd speak about how some of that plays into the novel.
Sure. So the section I just read from is from the first part of the novel, where Missy is 21 and 22. And she is a very unreliable narrator in that she's just, she is like very self-assured and cocky and obnoxious, and just kind of like steamrolling through her life in a way where she's trying to embrace every passionate second that she can in this very male dominated world of live music. And at a certain point in the 90s, and at a certain point in like the real guts of third wave feminism. So she's sort of trying to she's sort of in that moment where it's a real, if you can't beat them, join them feeling. And she starts out the tour having a lot of fun, and then it's she slowly starts to self-destruct, but we don't really hear the reality of what's happening as she's self-destructing, because she's still kind of like monologuing through this very this kind of faux self-confidence and sense of being right all the time. And I wanted to try to capture that feeling that you have, or that some people have when they're young, and there's like a ton of hubris and real cockiness. And I specifically wanted to have her sort of stomp her way through this moment in life until her decisions kind of catch up with her. Not to say that the decisions, but I'm judging the decisions she makes at all. In fact, I think they're there's a lot of reasons for them in terms of like decisions, elements of story, and how to structure the story. But yeah, so I think throughout the book, you get a lot from both Missy and her mom, Carola, and Missy's paternal grandmother, Ruth. You get the moments in their lives where they are having to make decisions about who they want to be with, and whether or not they want to be a parent or not, in like with these very specific moments in their lives in different eras. Because the book spans more time than I've ever tried to write into a single book. And like my next book, it's going to be 6 months. That's it. So, it was a bit of a struggle to try to figure out, if you're going to look at the 1920 until 2013, like, what do you want to include about these three women? And it sort of ended up being a bit of a collage of these very pertinent moments.
Well, I think yeah, no, you did. To me, the thing that trying to compile notes about this was difficult, because it's so expansive and so much happens in the novel. And even, after, I'd have to read it multiple times, but after reading it, it's just things change. Even right after the novel, things are kind of fluid, which is, I imagine, your intention, because you've written characters that are not neatly tied off, that aren't, stereotypically anything, that are very deep, that are flawed, that aren't necessarily great people at all times. They're, you can root for them, but they're not, there's nothing here that feels inauthentic or feels like somebody without a deep understanding of this is writing it, which I think is one of the problems with a lot of writing from an external point of view, which is, I think, part of the point of this, in this world. What I found was, there's this unique kind of structure that you've had where each part of the novel starts to give us more information about the other parts of the novel and each character. We build in a kind of, in these very significant layers, as opposed to having any real concrete idea throughout of who each person is. Each part informs our understanding of each character, and we start to feel differently about them. And it just, to me, feels organically the way people age and the way people actually learn about each other, the way families actually are. It's a build, it's a life, long thing. It's not just a neat story that can be told and packaged up that way. So, I mean, I think that's a lot of what the novel's about. I mean, and motherhood runs through this all from the beginning. It starts off with Missy going into a clinic or to a doctor and asking them to give her a tubal ligation so she doesn't have to ever have children. And then we go through the entire course of the novel with unwanted pregnancies, issues with abortion and who is deciding who can have them. And then the eventual drive, which is no secret about the novel, to whether she wants a child and at what point in her life she will have a child. So I think it all really builds to this comprehensive understanding of these women, and it's not neat. It's not all tied off. And I think, one thing I'd have a question about is the way you structured that and why you chose that, because you say it's so expansive and it's something that you wouldn't have done before. And there's also, without giving a spoiler away, a very unique way you set up the middle part of this book with Ruth's story that I think really, to me, changed the tone of the entire book and how we see everything for these women and who we thought they were. So I wonder if you could talk about that.
Sure. So the book changed a lot there was various incarnations. But throughout, the struggle that I had the most while writing this book was trying to capture and embody the character of Ruth. So for those who haven't read the book, Ruth is 83, and she is a very proper British lady, almost to a humorous degree. And she's very, very waspy, very kind of cold, but she's also been like a real maternal figure for Missy, especially after her mom left, because Carola leaves Missy when she's 13, and she has raised her on a commune up until then with Ruth's son Bryce, who sort of fleets in a little bit on the margins of the book. And to me, it was a real creative challenge to try to get into like a monologue of what it would be like to be her. And I did base some of the familial stories, specifically the historical narratives, on some factual elements of my father's family. But I didn't really know them very well. And so I had to create sort of who I thought these characters could be for Missy and Carola. And I found it very difficult to write convincingly as an 83-year-old. It sounds really, but sometimes you just have to admit your failures as you write. Like, I wrote so many drafts, and it was like things would flow and dialogue would flow, and then Ruth would arrive on the page and she would be like a wooden robot of an older person. And I tried to read books about aging, about, books with older narrators, auto memoir. Nothing could really make it sink in believably. So I felt like at one point I was listening to a podcast, and Ben Lerner was talking about the Topeka School and about writing, how he couldn't access his teenage self to write in that voice. I don't know if you read the Topeka School.
No, but that sounds interesting though.
Yeah, it's a great book. But I thought it was like, and it hadn't occurred to me until that moment where I was like, oh, I could give up. I could give up trying to really nail this character, and I could make a change by addressing the form. So I could completely shift my approach to, like, it could become a formal solution to what I thought was an imagination problem. And so And so I shifted the Ruth segment to be written sort of in a fragment style, and I felt like that was an honest way to still tell her story without pretending that I had some kind of emotional access that I didn't have. And so in Ruth's section, you get these real, almost list like prose poems almost. I mean, if the editor hadn't intervened, they probably would have just been prose poems. But like just little moments of her and in these like crucial moments in her life that I thought could relate and kind of be woven through what I could get deeper into with Carolyn and Missy. Because with Carolyn and Missy, Carola's mostly middle-aged when in her segments. Mostly she's kind of 35 to 60, and that's more closely to my age right now at 45. And I remember being a boisterous teenager in the 90s. So like there are ways that I can sort of relate to the milieu and the moments in both those characters. But Ruth was a struggle. And so, but once I addressed the form, I felt like Ruth finally came alive.
Well, that's one thing. What I mean, again, this is from me as a straight white man who has been lucky to have certain women in their lives and comes from quite a matriarchal family. To me, the women essentially were the ones in charge of my family, the ones who told all the stories, and I think that's probably what made me, was better for me as a person and better for a lot of men as a person if women have an actual active influence in your life and are actually, you have a relationship with older women who in your family who tell stories. And for me, that's what Ruth felt like when you tell that middle story, as being somebody who is British but descended from Turkey and watching, leaving in a time of war, seeing all these real things that almost seem alien sometimes to people here and in the other generations to follow in the book, including in her, and it just to me it felt very real in that way. And it felt like thinking of women in my family who had come from Northern Ireland and Northern England and the things they had gone through and the way they tell stories. And I think that goes to one of the other main points I had, because it seems like not only are these women in the story telling us their story and carrying these stories, but they also are the ones in charge of, deciding what they tell, what they withhold. And I think a lot of the novel is that. A lot of the novel seems like these very deep women, these very complicated characters who spend a lot of time deciding on what they're going to, withhold, whether it's from other people or themselves as far as truth goes or as far as reality, and then what they're going to tell and at what time in their lives they're going to tell or understand these things. So it just felt very real in that way. And I wonder how came to, if that was part of your process and just the nature of how stories are told and how truth is withheld or told.
Yes, I really wanted to capture, especially with Ruth, the sort of the tendency for WASPs of a certain age to like keep secrets. Mm-hmm. And to be really like stiff upper lip and to not admit when they're vulnerable and how that can impact generations, and how it kind of ends up feeling like dishonesty or like, but that sort of sense of like never wanting to appear weak. So, a lot of, the scene where Ruth is like escaping Smyrna in a rowboat as it burns, like that's a real memory that my granny had on my dad's side. And I didn't ever hear that from her. Like this is something she wrote down before she died. And to me, it's very funny, the things we choose to share with family and the ways we choose not to. And I've always been really drawn like to families who are really blunt and speak their mind. And because it's so foreign to me, because, there's not a lot of emotional language in my family tree. So, and I think that Missy is a character who is like kind of tired of that. And she also has the influence of having been raised in the 70s and 80s by a certain kind of subculture of hippies who are like, who kind of have a philosophy of openness and candor and politics first and like trying to change the world, but like have like all this these interpersonal disasters, and like kind of they replicate the sexism that happens, you know, outside of their collective experiment in ways that are kind of subtle and not subtle in some ways. And so she's also influenced by, you know, she can be kind of a cynical, hard ass character in a lot of ways, and I think that is having had, you know, having had been exposed to sort of this those kind of philosophies young, she can see, you know, you're always the critic. You can always see so clearly like what your parents believed, and you can see like, you know, every generation gets a little smarter. And you know, rebels in certain ways. And so, you know, Missy rebels as a teen by becoming like really buttoned up and joining the symphony, and she doesn't really party until she's 21 and joins an indie rock band, and then she really jumps into that world.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting too, because it is it's Ruth who has some of the things in the novel that I found, some of the things she says, and her awareness, and the awareness of, you know, I think that's what's interesting, is what the amount of awareness that is revealed, because none of these characters are you know, they're all so three-dimensional. So with Ruth, she's the one who's stiff upper lip, but also finds love later in her life, is open to it. It makes the decision of how her life will end at a certain point. She, you know, she is really shows a lot of agency, and you also frame it with the fact of knowing where she came from and knowing the time she was in, and still knowing that, you know, there were secret abortions and there was things she supported that she doesn't seem to support, that Missy thinks, even though she's already taking care of things like that. So it's really interesting, the nuance. And I also thought it was interesting that there's a part in it where Ruth actually is the one who says about Missy from another end of the spectrum, who is she to become? I think it was Ruth who said, who is she to become if she spends all her time with men? Is that with when Missy is in the band, because she seems to have this perspective of, you know, despite all this stiff upper lip, you know, whichever it is, she also understands the value of these women, you know, taking care of each other and being the ones who actually share truth, as opposed to the men that they're around who have the ability to have children later, have the ability to have certain amounts of privilege that they're not even aware of or that they're abusing, and who make decisions for other people. So I do think that is interesting, that from both other end of the spectrum, you get all these multifaceted women who have perspectives on things but aren't quite revealed until later. We don't know about Ruth being this way until the end. And then it kind of informs how Missy and Carola you know, transform as the novel goes on as well.
Yeah, I mean, with Ruth, she's sort of like, outwardly, if you were to talk to her throughout her life, she would probably say that she was an anti-feminist, and she was like kind of like all the ways that white women with means kind of can act hypocritically. And, you know, she pays a nurse to get an illegal abortion in the middle of the night in Montreal in the 50s. So she like has all these kind of feminist beliefs that she doesn't really ever admit. And I really kind of wanted her to have this amazing affair at the end of her life. You know, I thought it would be kind of interesting that I hadn't read a book. I mean, doesn't mean it's not out there. I just haven't come across it of like, you know, someone in their 80s having really hot sex right at that moment. Like, it's not something you hear about very often. I'm sure there are examples, but I thought that would be a kind of fitting way to have her life story kind of come to a conclusion, whereas she, you know, when she was a kid, everything was sort of dictated by her father, and then she has this philandering husband she doesn't really love, and, you know, her son is kind of, she loves deeply but is kind of disappointing in some ways, and so I kind of wanted that to happen in that way, sort of to give her this moment of joy. And also I sort of, with Missy and with Carola, like, they're sort of examples of the feminism of their time in some ways. Like, Carola is kind of coming of age during the second wave, and so she's of the first kind of generation to be told that they can have more than a domestic life, but the reality is that the world wasn't really set up that way, and then Missy sort of reckoning with all those kind of third wave feelings and doctrines that become, that now we look back on and can see the fractures in the logic and the philosophy, but we're each like kind of, important moments in how we think of feminism. So yeah, I don't know where I was going.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense, and it suits the way the novel goes, because I feel like that's kind of, the backbone of the novel is it's people learning these things and kind of coming into themselves at a certain point in their lives, and it's not exactly clear when that's going to be and who they're going to become. And you see these seeds as you think back on the novel, where seeds were planted early that kind of germinate, and then later on we see how they've manifested in these characters, including all of these lessons on motherhood and the things they were taught by their parents and where they grew up. When you're talking about, one thing that is definitely prevalent in the book that I think is handled, obviously extraordinarily well and is really interesting, is the way you handle sexuality in that way, linked in, or just relationships and intimacy, because, it's interesting. It ties to another point I was thinking of, but Ruth at the end of her life just lets go of some of these, these hangups and things that she had that are no longer useful to her anymore. And I think with her age and at a certain point with an illness, she just suddenly realizes she can let them go, and she decides to take this lover, which leads to this kind of interesting transformation of her character for the reader. And I think that's a lot of it too, whether it's sexuality or relationships. We see that through the novel with Missy, and her reckoning with her sexuality, from being on tour to, whether she wants to be a mother. You see it with Carola, with her relationships on this commune, where, for readers who aren't as familiar, Missy was raised on a commune by her parents, and then Carola fled the commune and left Missy there with the father. And so there's all these fractured relationships there. But as the novel goes on with these relationships, sexuality, their understanding of their own sexuality, how they interact, how they behave sexually, how they behave in relationships, really changes from each character. And so I thought that was a huge component of the book. And I wondered if you could talk about how you tackled that, because I thought it was really well handled and deeply nuanced.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was important to me that the characters grow and change over the period of the novel in ways that aren't expected. Like, it did trouble me at some point. This might be a bit of a spoiler, but, we meet Missy when she's trying to get her tubes tied, and no doctors will do it because they are paternalizing and they think she's going to regret it. And I actually based those scenes after my ex-sister-in-law tried to have the procedure done when she was 38 and knew she never wanted children. And even at 38, she was not allowed to elect to have her tubes tied. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, she went to several doctors in Quebec and they all said no. And I was just appalled by that, because you can get a vasectomy on demand. And so, and this was 4 years ago. And so I imagine what she would have had to go through in the 90s trying to do that at 22. And the specter of regret is always like part of this narrative of control with, when it comes to doctors and institutions. And so I was worried about what am I going to do? Because I knew that when we meet Missy again in her late 30s, she's going to want a kid with everything that she's got. And like, so in some ways I was, the authorial voice was sort of confirming those doctors, but that isn't exactly what I meant. I don't believe that that's true, and I don't believe that they were right. But I do think it's interesting, and what made me feel okay with making that decision was all of the right-wing rhetoric around detransitioning and around like watching how the trans community and scholars in that area have talk about, the specter of regret that parents and doctors sort of place on trans youth in terms of like, well, you don't know, you might change, we can't allow this for you. And the reality is that sometimes people do make big changes and then they change later in all kinds of ways. And everybody, no matter who you are, you might regret things you do when you're young, and you might make significant shifts, and you might become different people over the course of your life. And that's just like a beautiful part of life. And what's like problematic, or I hate that word, but what's like weird about that acknowledging that is just like, you know, both things can be true, that doctors are paternalizing and they have too much control in both of those scenarios, and also people can change and regret things. And so in Missy's case, part of her reluctance to ever imagine being able to have a kid was informed by her mother abandoning her, and also just being like really identifying more as like a party kid and not wanting that responsibility, and seeing having a kid as like a real drain and a bummer, which is how most of us feel when we're 21, you know, like, so, you know, so many things can be true at once. And that was important to me to emphasize. And also part of the reason why I wanted Missy, I kind of wanted this to be a bit of a late in life coming out book, because Missy sort of, you know, has all these affairs with these different cis guys and is really detached from them, and not, she's kind of a heartbreaker. And she never really quite connects the dots until she's older, that maybe that had something to do with her queerness. And for me personally, like, I was never the type of person who had the typical narrative of like, oh, when I was 4, I knew I was queer. I just like would literally never occur to me until a girl walked up to me and kissed me, and I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. This might be a thing. And so part of that was sort of part of the story with Misty was sort of imagining like, oh, what if it had never occurred to me? And then I'd only sort of cemented in my consciousness later. And so I was interested in pursuing the idea of like coming out after a divorce in your 30s, and what that would be like, and what it would also be like to not come out as gay, but to come out as bi, and to really feel like a femme identity is the thing that works, or that feels the most comfortable. And I think Missy comes into that when she meets Andy and has this kind of crazy affair. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know where I'm going with that either, but
no, well, you're talking about how this, you know, how this talk, you know, these characters change and how their sexuality is part of that in their relationships. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good thing that you bring up, because what I liked about the novel too is, you know, as an author, even if you're writing in first person, you have this kind of ability to, you know, tell the reader what's happening, tell the reader what the character knows. And in this case, you're not really doing that. You're essentially just, you have this realistic depiction of somebody who, while they're living through this thing, is living through it. They don't have all this. If they had all this introspection and all this way to frame it, then they wouldn't maybe be living through it that way. They wouldn't be doing these things, but that's not how life works, right? So that's how Missy feels. She feels like she doesn't, and it's the same for each character in the novel at different times in their lives. Maybe they don't even have the information or the, you know, hardware, software, whichever, the ingredients to even understand what they're going through, or to, you know, they have these missing pieces. They have this missing bits of understanding. I mean, with Missy, for example, an interesting detail that you show after she's arrested in that part that you read is although she's in a band which is successful, which I also liked in the book, putting her in a successful band that is about to break, instead of this, you know, the more cliched stuck in a van, which like it's cool that they're at this point that shows they're capable, she's well trained, but then you say that when she gets to Vancouver and she's stuck there, she's never traveled on her own. So there's an interesting thing there where you're then seeing where they're very much adults and where they're very much not. And I think this reads very real about Missy, and I think it ties in with her sexuality and the way she discovers herself, because, you know, as you say, it's not until Andy that she has her first real intimate sexual experience, mm-hmm. and you know, that revisits later on in the novel in a different way. But yeah, I think that's part of it, right? It's part of how they develop, and it feels very real to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was aiming for. I was kind of, especially, you know, when we meet Missy, she is 21, 22, and she's like, you know, having all these crazy experiences. But then when she gets to Vancouver, she really is still like a kid. And I don't know if, like, I grew up not really traveling. And then when I did, I was like, oh, it was like a skill I hadn't learned. And I remember being in a hotel room for the first time by myself and being like, oh, this is weird, and feeling 10 years old. And so I kind of wanted Missy, you know, even though she grew up on a commune, which kind of feels like an exciting and interesting way to grow up, it also was oddly sheltered, you know, like even if she was like, I don't know, encouraged to read Marx and like eating tofu, she was still, you know, on a farm and only interacting with certain people. So yeah, I wanted to kind of capture that feeling of, you know, being out in the world when you're 21, 22 and thinking you know so much. And then in these moments of realizing you don't.
Well, I think that works because that's kind of there's a lot of that in the novel. It's like, how could you know what you don't know? Like and I think it's interesting. We have a question here that I'll get to in just a second, but to close this up, I think it's also, it makes sense the way you've written these, as I said, very organic, very believable, very true to life characters in a way that isn't, you know, always conventionally done, which is why they feel so real. And so, you know, we can really relate to them. But it's also, you've chosen specific times, specific people, specific periods. You know, this is in the 90s, right, when she's in her band.
Mm-hmm.
The access to information, whether it's, you know, people, the actual terminology for people's gender, for how they want to be identified, to knowing, you know, having access to information about who you are and things that might inform your education about yourself or other people. These are all things that I think are really important. And it seems like you've made decisions in the novel to show these eras and these places or people where they might not even have the ability to learn these things yet. And it takes, as their lives unfold, for them to even have access to learning these things.
Yeah, they don't have a computer in their pocket. You know?
No, yeah,
get things in the mail.
So much of in teaching a class, so much is like, are you in an era with cell phones, or are you not in an era with cell phones? Because that changes everything. So I think that was an interesting choice. And I'm sure that it was very specifically you chose to do it that way in these time periods.
Yes, I always find it so interesting, the cell phone, no cell phone divide, in terms of like how much more interesting your plot can be without them. Mm-hmm. And it was really fun to be in the 90s for that reason, almost.
Fun and harrowing as well, but depending how far you have to walk in the snow. Yeah. But anyway, I'll get to this question quickly because we only have a few minutes left. So Stacy asks, what are you working on next? And are you doing any other upcoming events?
So I'm currently working on a book of short stories called Wild Failure, which is going to come out in 2023. And I'm also working on a new novel called The Fake about, it's a bit of a thriller about a pathological liar. And
did you have any events? Yeah.
I have a ton of events and I don't remember when or what they are. I'm sorry.
Look on Zoe's social media. Yeah, just go to the Twitters. So yeah, I mean, for me, they asked me too. I'm working on a novel that is it's way too. I have to cut 60,000 words, so it's happening. But no, it's just taking longer. And I mean, maybe this is another thing I could ask you, because I'm not sure when you completed this novel or whichever, because obviously many things were upended by the pandemic, and including this, and including various other things, and things have changed. So I wondered if you worked on, I imagine this was done pre-pandemic, but I'm not sure.
It wasn't done pre-pandemic, no, okay. And I did start it in 2009, and I, which is 12 years ago now, which is crazy, but I put it aside and I was procrastinating writing it, and that's how I wrote The Best Kind of People, was because I didn't want to write the spectacular. So yeah, it just took a really long time.
Yeah. Well, it just, when seeing the questions about what people are working on, I guess that, it depends what they've had going on for the last year or so. And, with their ability to, I mean, again, too, it's interesting in a novel like yours because, it's kind of a timeless kind of story. And I wonder how it was for you in the pandemic early on, as far as writing goes, or editing, or anything you're doing, because you're busier than I am as far as having to actually complete things for people who have paid you. So, for me, it's the idea of, is there any point in writing? And then, me, if you're writing about certain things, I'm like, well, I'll always, writing about poor people, doing poor people things in rural areas, and violence and cycles of poverty, that'll always be relevant. And I feel like it's the same with your work, is the, the things in this seem to be the kind of thing that luckily during COVID would not have had to get thrown out the window because they're timeless,
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Yeah. So I'm not sure I don't know if we're at time yet. We're getting there. I haven't told them to kick me off yet, but yeah. So I think that's really it. I mean, if yeah, so I think that's it. They're just saying that the time's up. We don't have any more questions, but it was great talking to you, Zoe. It flew by. I'll hopefully see you in person in real life sometime soon in a post-vaccinated world. But anyway, great talking to you.
Great talking to you, Kevin. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you.
Thanks to both of you for that conversation. It was really lovely. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And also thanks to everyone for tuning in from home. If you want to pick up a copy of The Spectacular by Zoe Whittall, check out our virtual bookstore in partnership with Another Story Bookshop. And our official ebook and audiobook seller is Rakuten Kobo. Today is the final day to sign up for a giveaway in partnership with Rakuten Kobo. You can visit the website, which is toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca, and it's /2021-festival-contest for your chance to win one of 3 special prizes, including new Kobo e-reader. Remember, for each day of the festival that you've tuned in, we'll announce one bonus entry code. And today's bonus entry code is Spectacular. Make sure to tune in later today to our closing panel, Indigenize, Decolonize, Indigenous Writers Roundtable. And that's at 5:30 Eastern. That's coming up in less than an hour. And we'll have David A. Robertson, Vivan Fox, Jay Simpson, and Daryl J. McLeod. And for more information about this year's lineup, as well as the panelists that you've heard from today, you can visit our website at toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca. And if you'd like to support The Word on the Street by making a donation, you can simply head to our website and click Donate Now at the top of the homepage. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great afternoon.